Hello once again my friends and welcome to yet another PhilbertGreen painting video. As always this is a professional video if you are following along at home. Time for a special video. As pretty much all the content from Resi 3 has now been covered bar the terrain pack, I decided to paint up the minis that came as exclusive sculpts if you back the Kickstarter campaign for this board game. We have a special small box with 8, yes count them, 8 exclusive minis to paint up. These include a different sculpt for each of the 3 UBCS mercs included in the core set, Barry Burton in his legendary S.T.A.R.S uniform, and 4 different Jill Valentines, each one a representation of her alternate video game costumes to add some variety to your campaign. There's a lot to paint here, so let's get cracking. Just like my other videos, if you are following along at home, just take your time and go at a pace that you are comfortable with. As ever, we'll be basing every mini in this video with Mechanicus Standard Grey. The first minis I painted out of the box were the alternate sculpts for Carlos, Mikhail, and Nikolai. I didn't bother making a step-by-step for these guys, as I already have done 2 separate videos now on painting UBCS mercenaries. You can find them linked down in the description below. Gotta say though, I'm really loving that alternate Mikhail sculpt wielding that gigantic anti-tank rocket launcher. So, next up was Police Officer Jill. The first alternate model for our leading lady, this sculpt is based off her alternate costume in which she is wearing her RPD uniform. So, let's get cracking. You know how we do RPD uniforms by now. I used the Fang first to paint her skirt, and then followed that up with her police cap, avoiding the badge on the front. Yep, you guessed it, Russ Grey was next, which I used to paint her shirt, again taking care to avoid any badges that are on her uniform. I next used Cadian Fleshtone to paint her legs, arms and face. I avoided her hands to be painted later. I was considering painting her legs to look like she was wearing tights, but I decided to stick to what she looks like on the in-game model. After that, I used Steel Legion Drab to paint her belt, including in between the buckle, and her shoes, taking care not to get any on her previously painted legs. The next step was to paint her hair, for which I used Mournfang Brown to colour that OG Trilogy bob cut. For her gloves, I wanted to do something a little different, and decided to paint her gloves with white Scar to look like she was wearing her full dress uniform, and kind of like a stereotypical traffic cop. And then I used Abaddon Black for her handgun, just to finish up her hands. And finally, I used Retributor Armour to paint the badges on her cap, her shoulder, and to carefully pick out her belt buckle. The very last stage was, of course, the washes. I used Drakenhof Nightshade for her shirt, skirt, and cap, Reikland Fleshshade for her skin, and then Nuln Oil for everything else, being careful on the white of her gloves so as not to darken them down too much. And of course, to fit her into our pre-existing roster, she gets the standard basing technique and the blue band around the base. The next mini is the second of Lucky Jill's 4 alternate costume changes. Channeling her inner Saturday Night Fever, it's Disco Suit Jill. This was a quick and easy paint job, so let's just get right into it. First things first, I used Celestra Grey to paint her suit jacket and trousers, going for a more sort of off-white colour, akin to the video game, avoiding the lapels and collar, which I painted next using Mephiston Red. Cadian Fleshtone was next, as I used it to paint her face and hands, then painted her hair with Mournfang Brown. I used Abaddon Black to paint her gun, of course, then finished her off by painting her disco platform pumps with Steel Legion Drab. And of course I brought the whole model together with a couple of washes. Much the same as any light colour we've done before, I very carefully used Nuln Oil to pick out the creases and folds of her suit, as well as her gun and shoes. Then I followed that up by using Reikland Fleshshade for her skin. To match her up with the rest of our minis, she gets the standard basing technique and the blue band around the base. The next mini I chose to paint up was Biker Jill, clad in a revealing leather ensemble that really won't protect her at all if she comes off a bike. It's Jill's penultimate costume. First up, I used Corvus Black to paint her entire bodysuit and elbow-length gloves, avoiding the belts and buckles, as well as her boots, which I then painted next using Abaddon Black. There is a slight difference in the two shades of black, and it works wonders on this mini. For the large belt around her waist, I used Mephiston Red to capture that video game look. Then I used Steel Legion Drab to paint the smaller belt above the red one, as well as the two belts around her thighs just to break up the black colour a little bit. Time to bring her to life, I used Cadian Fleshtone to paint the skin on her face, the small arm sections that aren't covered, and her fingers poking out of her gloves. Then I finished that iconic hairdo with Mournfang Brown. For the last little details, I used Abaddon Black for her gun, Leadbelcher for all the buckles on her belts and boots, as well as the clasps on her boots, and channeling her inner Ada Wong, Mephiston Red for her choker. After that, all that was left was washing and basing. I used Nuln Oil for the entirety of her bodysuit, boots, gloves and gun, and then Reikland Fleshshade for her skin, red belt and choker. For basing, you guessed it, the standard technique, and then finished her off with the blue band around the base to add her to our collection of heroes. Jill's final outfit change is a callback to where survival horror all started. It's her S.T.A.R.S uniform from Resident Evil 1, complete with shoulder pads and beret to complete that iconic look from the beginning of the whole saga. Let's get her combat ready. To start her off, I used Kantor Blue to paint her trousers, belt loops included. Then I used Russ Grey to paint her shirt, and the Fang for her shoulder pads and straps coming off of them, as well as her iconic beret. I wanted these to be a different colour to her trousers to match her concept art. Corvus Black was up next, as I used it to paint multiple things, starting with her boots, then her belt, her gloves, and finally her super fiddly watch strap. Next up was her skin. Yeah, you know it by now, it's Cadian Fleshtone for her face and arms. After that, I used Steel Legion Drab to paint the utility belt she's rocking, as well as the pouch hanging off of it. Then Dryad Bark for her gun holster on her raised leg. Nearly there, I used Mournfang Brown to pick out her hair under her beret, and then Abaddon Black to paint her Samurai Edge handgun. Much the same as her compatriot, Brad, I used a watered down layer of the Fang to go over the S.T.A.R.S badge on her sleeve, then tried to pick out the stars themselves with Retributor Armour. The final finishing touch she needed was a dab of Leadbelcher on her belt buckle and her watch face. To complete our heroine's model, I first washed her trousers, shoulder pads, beret and shirt with Drakenhof Nightshade, taking care on the lighter shirt to get it into the recesses, then used Nuln Oil for her boots, gloves, gun, belt, hair and holster, then finished her off with Reikland Fleshshade for her skin. And of course she gets the usual basing technique and that snazzy blue band around the base to add S.T.A.R.S Jill to our roster. Speaking of stars, as I kept saying in previous videos, the final model in the Kickstarter exclusives box is the better model of Bazzaby, good old S.T.A.R.S Bazzaby. Let's get him ready to decimate his enemies with his insane confidence and firepower. Trying to capture his appearance in the, if I do say so myself, perfect Resident Evil 1 remake, you can find an in-depth review of it here on this very channel. If you're interested, self-plug, self-plug. I started by painting his trousers with Mechanicus Standard Grey. Next up was that iconic body warmer / body armour of his. I used Mephiston Red to get it looking nicely combat ready. The same as Brad the Chicken Heart, I used white scar for his shirt sleeves and the tiny neck bit poking out from under his collar. Again, layering it up to get a nice smooth colour. Once his clothes were done, I used Cadian Fleshtone to paint his skin. This included his arms, fingers and face, taking care to avoid his hair and gloves, as well as Barry's iconic beard. After that, I used Corvus Black to paint his boots all over, both of his fingerless gloves, and finally his watch strap on his left arm. To make his hair less grey, I used that weirdly named XV88, the very same paint I used on the other Barry to paint his hair, and pick out that awesome beard. Referring back to dear departed Bradley again, I used a thinned down dab of the Fang for the S.T.A.R.S badge on his sleeve to leave some of the details still visible. After that, I used Steel Legion Drab to paint his bandolier wrapping around his torso, and then his belt wrapping around his waist. To finish off old Baz's equipment, I used Dryad Bark to paint his Magnum's holster hanging from his chest, and the pouches on the front and the back of his belt. As I am so wont to do, I made things slightly harder for myself by using Celestra Grey at the very last minute to paint the raised square thingies on the back of Barry's gloves for a purely aesthetic choice. Moving on to the metallics next, I used Retributor Armour to try and pick out the stars on his S.T.A.R.S badge, and finally I used Leadbelcher to paint Baz's belt buckle, a dab for his watch face, and of course, the ultimate undead killing machine, the Tyrant's Bane, his magnum, the Silver Serpent. Of course, the final thing to do was give him a wash. I used Nuln Oil for his boots, trousers, body warmer, shirt, badge, hair, gloves, belt, pouches, and gun. Although on the trousers and body warmer, I carefully picked out the recesses and folds to give it a more pronounced look and not darken the colours too much. I followed that up with Reikland Fleshshade for his skin. Of course, he was based the same way as everyone else in this video, and given that blue band around the base, as thank God Barry's our ally and not our enemy. And there you have it. One long video, but one long list of alternate sculpts for the majority of our player characters that will look awesome on the tabletop and provide some variation in our playthroughs. Some of these minis took a lot of time to do, and some of them actually not as much as you'd think. The multiple Jills are a great nod to her alternate costumes that are unlockable in the video game upon multiple playthroughs, and the Mercs get some nice sculpts which I like to think are somewhat reminiscent of their loadouts in the Mad Jackals minigame. Not to mention, I'm really pleased with how S.T.A.R.S Barry came out, and I now have a sneaky recipe for his minis in the Resident Evil 1 board game. Other than the terrain pieces from this game, that's basically it. It's been a long road to get here, and I had no idea my videos would get as popular as they did. I can't thank you guys enough for your support, and if you want to see more videos, especially painting videos for Resi 1, then please like, comment, and subscribe. Once again, thank you all for watching, I really do appreciate it, and I hope to see you all in the next one. Stay safe, survivors!